All right, I think we'll get started, and then people can kind of just join in and potentially just miss the first couple of minutes, but appreciate that people are on their lunch hour. So hopefully you've made this a brown bag session and having some delicious kai as we speak. Kia ora koutou and welcome to the introduction to sustainability and business. So we'll just get started with karakia so that we can kind of all come into the same space today. Tūtara mai I runga, tūtara mai I raro, tūtara mai I waho, tūtara mai I roto. Kia toai te mori tū, te mori ora ki te katoa. Haumi e, hui e, tai ki e.
Kia ora koutou, ko Ayla Irving-Lamb aho. I'm the Network Connector at the Sustainable Business Network.
And tēnā koutou katoa, ko Tori Calver aho, and I'm the Head of Culture and Impact. And we're really excited to kind of welcome you here today to what might be kind of the beginning of the start on the journey, or more of a kickstart. Today we're going to cover a little bit about us as a business, just so you understand how we can help. Then we'll take some time to define what we mean by that somewhat overused term these days, sustainability, particularly in relation to business. Then looking at how different businesses are reacting to the challenges, but also the opportunities in this space, before settling down with kind of 5 practical tips to really get you started. And all going well, we'll have some time for kind of Q&A at the end.
Great. So yeah, like Tori said, I'll start by just telling you a little bit about the Sustainable Business Network. So we're a network of businesses and we're about 20 years old this year. And our goal is that we're transforming New Zealand business to meet the world's sustainability challenges. And we're tackling this huge goal in 3 different ways. The first is what we call our systems change work, and that's where we collaborate to co-create solutions to some of the biggest problems in New Zealand. And we do that in 3 key areas, which are acting on climate, reducing waste, and regenerating nature. And then we have our upskilling, and that's like what you guys are here for today. We're building sustainability capability in businesses by providing training, advice, tools, and resources. So we do a lot of writing and creating of tools to help businesses along on their sustainability journey. And then the last bit is the profile and connect, which is sort of the network part. And that's that we're celebrating and inspiring success. We connect organizations with people and ideas. And a big part of that piece is our Sustainable Business Awards, which we run every year. And that is the chance to celebrate all the great things that are happening. Really important in this space. Sustainability can be a heavy workplace, and often it feels a little bit hard, and it's good to have some time to just really embrace what's going well and celebrate the businesses that are working really hard and doing the mahi.
So what is sustainability? What do we particularly, it is part of our organisation name, so what do we think about when we use that term? Literally, it is the capacity to endure. A sustainable business is one that generates profit, a very important element of a successful organisation, but while improving societal and environmental conditions. So a good image to think of for this is a 3-legged stool. And if you imagine on one leg, you've got your economic pillar, so your kind of profitability, important that you're able to keep the doors open. Then you've got society, how are you interacting with the people? So how well do you pay your staff, making sure there's no slave labor involved in your organization. And then the third is the environment. So it's really important that all of those are in harmony, because if you give one pillar too much focus, and this has traditionally happened with the economic pillar, the stool topples over. But when all those things are in balance, then the world works well. So economic, financial, social, and environment. How businesses kind of think about value. Traditionally, it's been this kind of shareholder value, which has really prioritized that economic pillar, often to the detriment of the other two. A lot of really successful businesses in the beginning had slave labor, for instance, attached, or really kind of bad working conditions for the people who made the goods, as well as polluting rivers. You kind of think of the industrial age where you saw some big examples of this. And so financial returns are all that really matters, and all that those think about. And the kind of stock market reinforces this, where people are in it for short-term versus long-term gains. Then knowing the kind of increasing harms that style of business does have on society has led us more moving into this shared value idea, where businesses are starting to consider and think about and potentially act against, improving so kind of societal outcomes, paying people better, for instance, as well as kind of reducing the harm that they're doing on the environment. And this is where you've seen a rise in corporate social responsibility, or CSR. That's obviously kind of been an addition to particularly big companies. So starting to think about it, but profit is still king. Where we need to get to, where we'd definitely like to see us head as an organisation, is more into the system value, where business, recognizes its part in this kind of wider framing, so that business ideally not only doesn't have a negative impact, but actually has a positive impact on society and the environment. And it's there to kind of serve the people and really pay back the land that it operates in. So a bit of a way to go till we get there, but pretty exciting place to be. And so why is it important that we start focusing on moving to these kind of system value and to becoming sustainable businesses? Is that there is no planet B. Lots of billionaires, trying to get out of Dodge and heading on rockets to other places, but this is the only planet that really can support life on Earth. So we need to make sure that our kind of way that we're living now doesn't impact the ability of future generations to continue to survive. And there's some pretty concerning stats out there that currently we use about 2 Earths to support our lifestyle. Globally, it looks about 1.8. In New Zealand, we've topped that number already, kind of using 2 Earths. And there's different kind of stats around this, a few different studies. And 2 is at the lower end of the spectrum. Some say 4. There was a Norwegian study out a couple of years ago that showed if we all ate like they do in a G20 country, we would need 7 Earths to sustain our lifestyle. And then when you add to that some of the concerning stats that we lose about 1/3 of the food we produce through kind of loss and waste, thinking we're using more than our Earth can challenge, and then we're just throwing it away before we even consume it. So it's now pretty much globally agreed that climate change is real, humans are causing it, and we need to act together to do everything we can to reduce our emissions. In 2015, we came together in Paris, and there was great celebration as countries started to lock in targets. Globally, we need to reduce our emissions by 45%, and that's off 2010 levels. So it's actually higher than 45% off today's levels, to keep that 1.5 within reach. And the ultimate goal that we're heading towards is to hit net zero by 2050. And what net zero means is that we want to reduce our emissions down as far as we can, and then we will offset or draw down those kind of final carbon emissions that we're unable to eliminate from the way we work. But it's not about just kind of, we need to do a lot more than just plant trees. So how are we tracking against this goal, right? So in the 1990s, the countries came together and decided we needed to reduce emissions. You can see we kept going up. In 2015, the world got together and really said, this is serious. We need to reduce our emissions, and they kept going up. COVID in kind of 2020 here is where we really first saw the first dip, but we also learned through COVID how quickly we can change our behavior when we need to. And we're starting to head into that time that we're hearing about this a lot more on the media. Individuals and businesses are starting to get a lot more pressure. So while it might be taking us a bit of time, we know we can act quickly. How will that kind of project into the future, into actual warming in terms of degrees? So if all the governments are able to hit the targets that they pledged last year in Glasgow, we're looking at about a 2-degree warming. So we actually need to do better than what we're currently working towards as well, to really keep within that 1.5 degree pathway. And that 1.5 degree is expected to be hit just shortly after 2030, which is why this decade is so important for us to act. And, you know, what does the difference between 1.5 and 2 mean? And it is quite significant. So you think at the beautiful kind of tourist attractions of our coral reefs around the world, a significant one being the Great Barrier, 70% of those are gone under 1.5. Pretty much all of them are gone under 2. We're looking at ice-free summers in the Arctic, 1 every 100 years under 1.5, 1 in every 10 under 2. Those floods and those kind of extreme weather that we're seeing more and more on the news these days, and in our own country as well, there's 100% increase in flood risk under 1.5 and an almost 200% under 2. 9% of the world's population exposed to extreme heat waves once every couple of decades versus almost a third. And you think about that economic bill keeps building and building and building. So a release by the International Panel for Climate Change just yesterday shows that it is vital for us to keep kind of, you know, financially for us to be able to afford what we need to do, we need to act now, because that bill is just going to get larger and larger, and it will cost us more and more if we keep kicking the can down the road.
So a lot of information there around what the situation is, and you can see how desperately we need to take action, and we need to start doing it pretty quickly. However, we still have many businesses burying their heads in the sand and choosing to just continue operating as usual. Some of that is through it feeling too big, some of it is through it's not a priority, and some people still aren't quite aware of how bad the situation is. And this reaction is really informed by businesses still operating in that shareholder value model that Tori showed you earlier. I know that changing the business isn't easy in our current system, especially for the small to medium businesses, and then especially with the last few years we've had. So we know it's super tough, but I'm going to show you an example of a huge business who have chosen to deliberately not take any steps towards a more positive business model and what that's meant for them and the planet. So some businesses have chosen to continue with business as usual. But what we're seeing in the media is that they're starting to catch up with them. And they're exposing how they're actively trying to stop positive progress and putting more money into this than actually trying to put that money towards positive change. And this is continuously causing more and more damage to our planet and our people. But on the other side of the coin, there are some really inspiring progressive businesses who are choosing to pivot and change their business models. So we're going to give you some examples of those as well. So here we have Ørsted, who were originally called Danish Oil and Natural Gas, but changed their name in 2017 to officially signify their permanent shift away from the use of fossil fuels. Now they're a world-leading operator of wind farms. Here's a quote from the 2020 annual report. In a decade, we have transformed our business from being one of Europe's most carbon-intensive companies to a global green energy leader. Now we're on track to become carbon neutral in our energy generation and operations by 2025, making us the first major energy company to transform from fossil fuels and reach net zero emissions. So this is just a really excellent example of an organization that saw this sort of wave coming, but they chose to see that as an opportunity to change for the better. And they've been really successful because of it. And so they thought, are we in the business of fossil fuels, or are we in the business of providing energy? And shifting their thinking meant that they could change their business for the better. Now we've a couple of New Zealand examples. This is Future Post. You might not have heard of them, but if you do engage in any of the soft plastic recycling schemes around New Zealand, you're actively using their service. So they're turning waste into resource by taking that soft plastic and turning it into fence posts. And this is a really good example of someone who's kind of seen a broken cycle, seen a little broke in the sort of chain, and has chosen to instead of all that plastic going to landfill, find a better solution for it. Then we also have Atik, who are one of the really famous ones now in New Zealand. And so far, Atik have saved over 10 million plastic bottles from entering landfill, and they plant 1 tree per order. Brian West, who is the founder, says, I started Atik out of frustration for the abhorrent amount of waste created by the cosmetics industry, and in particular, the amount of plastic and waste created by our bathroom essentials. So if you don't know, they make shampoo bars, moisturizer bars, so you don't need them in a plastic bottle. And what's been really exciting seeing this as well is the success of Atik has meant that other kind of really big mainstream brands have also chosen to offer a more package-free model or a circular solution. And so you can see the kind of effect that that business has had on that entire industry.
Awesome. So you know, there's obviously a lot of reasons why we need to kind of be moving into a more sustainable business model, and you know, the idea of kind of scaring with some of those stats at the beginning isn't so you kind of go, problem's too big, what can I do? I'll continue to bury my head in the sand. Personally, it's what I guess I did for a number of years, but to kind of realize we're past that stage. But it's not just what is the you know, the negative things that we're avoiding, but also what are the benefits? What are the kind of opportunities for your business that can occur through making that switch? So number one is really connecting with this wider consumer base. So there's been a massive rise in this eco-conscious consumer, as you've probably called them. And they are really concerned and are, you know, making decisions based on their values. And year after year, that number continues to rise. Consumer NZ did a survey a couple of years ago, and it showed that almost half of those surveyed deliberately switched to a brand or service provider that they deemed to be more sustainable. So this is really about widening your customer base. And then, of course, a flow on from that is that you increase your market share. So by having as broad a customer base as possible, you're able to, you know, connect with that wider market and, you know, ideally show kind of something different than your competitors. And because there's still a lot of business who aren't doing much in that space, there really is still that first mover advantage happening now. So number 3 is a reduction in costs. You know, we're not going to say that some decisions won't cost you money, because they will. It could be that you decide to lift wages, for instance, and that kind of leads to costs down the line. But also by inputting green initiatives, they're often more energy efficient. They're often kind of increased efficiency that allows you to reduce those costs at the same time as reducing your emissions profile. We have a few good examples of this in our climate action toolbox that Ayla will talk to later. SOAR, which is a New Zealand printing company, over a few years saved almost 500,000 just through inputting green measures like switching out the energy bulbs, moving to composting, reducing waste. So a lot of kind of plus side and kind of really looking at those both kind of high emitters, but also often expensive activities within the business. Cool. And number 4, and I actually think this is a really important one, particularly in the current climate, because 2022 has been dubbed the year of the Great Resignation. So it's kind of really important, and there's a lot of inflation pressure on things like wages. So the more you can provide businesses and employees with that strong purpose outside of necessarily just increasing wages is really important. in a Deloitte survey, they showed that about 75% of millennials, so with the majority of people in the workforce today, were prepared to take a pay cut and, to really align with an organisation that had strong sustainability values. And we see this a lot. We're a not-for-profit, we don't pay corporate rates, but we do get a lot of people coming from the corporate world who take pay cuts because they're keen to do more with their day, and they might have eco-anxiety, and they want to make sure that they are working for a business who cares, not just about them, but about everyone that their business interacts with and the planet. So a really important one here. And then also, why is it as part of that risk and governance and that long-term success? So often you will save money in the short term by potentially choosing an option that isn't as good for people or the planet, but long term that's going to damage whether it's your reputation as a business or just the viability. Also, there's more and more legislation happening in this space. Banks are now required to report on their climate risks, which means they're less likely to lend out business loans to high emitters. And they're actively looking for those businesses who can show positive impact, not even just kind of moving away from negative, but actually really able to show how through their operations they're improving things. So I think this is still me. So kind of given that, what actions, and we really want to focus the second half of the webinar around specific actions that you and your business can take today, and what resources are available to help you. So we've just picked up 5 key things that you can might start to help you change your mindset, but also your operations. So number 1, and this is really important, understand your emissions and take action. So Ayla's going to take you through a great tool around that, but also kind of show you what delta is between different activities that we have and how emissions rank up. Then number 2, we're going to talk about start thinking circular. How do we kind of make sure we're keeping resources in use? 3, buying sustainably. 4, communicating, whether it's to your employees, your suppliers, or your customers in an honest manner. And last but not least, building your knowledge in this space.
So the first one, understanding your emissions and taking action. I often think about sustainability, and we see that there's almost like hot topics of the moment, and emissions, climate change, all that has really been the front runner for the last few years, which is great. It's a great place to start. So what you can do is, first I'll tell you a little bit about sort of what is happening in New Zealand. So we are currently the 5th in the OECD for total greenhouse gas emissions per capita. So not a list we want to be leading, and especially risky in New Zealand, considering we loved our, tourism is huge and we love that kind of clean green image that really we're not actually doing. It's a bit of a facade now. So it's a really good place to start, and every little bit makes a difference. So what we can look at here is the greenhouse gas emissions from typical personal activities. And these, even though this is from personal individual activities, it's a really easy way to think about your business as well, because many small to medium businesses in New Zealand would have a pretty similar sort of breakdown of their emissions. So first here we have waste. So waste is a great place to start in your business because it's quite, you can see it, it's tangible. So you can do a waste audit, look through your bins, see what is in there and what you can reduce. And the greenhouse gas emissions from waste is when you're sending them to landfill. So you can, just start looking through your waste, and it's an easy place to start reducing first and finding better options instead of it all going in one bin. Then we have electricity or energy. So we're lucky in New Zealand, much of our energy is from renewable sources. So it's great to have a discussion with your energy provider about where your energy is coming from, and trying to get that from renewable resources. And also this is a great one that you can look at how to be more efficient with your energy usage. And that will be one of those good money saving ones as well. Then we have here a breakdown of what a kind of typical petrol car, an EV and an e-bike. So you can see how much larger that petrol car is than an EV. So that as well is a great place to think about as your business operations go, if you can reduce travel, or you can travel in a different way instead of just jumping in your car. Often there are easier ways, it's not hard to jump on public transport or walk or bike, but it's just reframing how you think about it, so you're not just automatically jumping in the car. And we also know that with the lockdowns and everything going on, a lot can be done online, so that's been a good sort of cut down the last few years for many businesses. Here we have diet, so you can see the difference between a high meat and dairy diet and a no meat and dairy diet. This one might not seem super relevant for business, but it's a good conversation to have with your employees. At SBN, we think about that when we run events. We also think about it for staff sort of functions around what we offer, and making sure that you do support staff who are trying to have a lower dairy or meat intake by, say, having different milk options in your kitchen. But yeah, you can see that. And I'm not saying try and become vegan overnight. It's not an easy transition, but it's all just starting to think about it and have that reduction. And then here we have flights, which obviously are huge. That one you will know if you've ever done one of those kind of like quizzes online for your own carbon footprint. As soon as you put a flight in there, you are through the roof. It's really has a huge impact. So again, it's, sometimes flying feels you've got to do it for business, but it's just taking that extra moment to think if it's really necessary, or if there was another way you could have that meeting or not need to travel. So all of that stuff is kind of covered in our climate action toolbox. This is a great place to start. It's a free tool. It sits on the business.gov website, and we created it with some amazing partners. So what it is if you go to this page, you'll see this climate action toolbox, and you'll hit that button that says get started. Then it will ask you a few sort of key questions about your business operations, and then it will tell you what your kind of easy ways you can reduce your emissions are, and it falls into the categories on the left there: moving people, moving goods, office operations, site operations and equipment, and designing and making products. And it gives you key ways that you can reduce your emissions in those areas. So if you see, this is what the website looks like, and it's really focused on practical, easy ways that you can do it. It's not about being super resource heavy, because we know that it can be too much for some businesses to try and calculate their emissions or go through that process. So this is another way that you can get started today without having to worry about doing it through another kind of source or anything, and see where you can start. And then at the bottom there is what we have, lots of different case studies of businesses and what they've been doing, so you can read about real businesses who are making those changes. And along the bottom there, you can see the partners who helped us to create this amazing tool, free for you guys. And as you can see, there are lots of kind of big businesses there, so that it could be free for the small to medium businesses who are kind of on that journey.
Cool, thanks, Ayla. So number 2 is really to start thinking circular, because it is a bit of a mindset shift, but once you start thinking that way, your actions will soon follow. So why is it important? So we talked about how we're currently using almost 2 Earths, and what is that? What are we doing with all that stuff? Well, we're throwing a lot of it away. So just like we are topping the charts for our per capita carbon footprint, we're also topping the charts in New Zealand for how much waste we produce. This is, me trying to upcycle with my son during lockdown. But, every single person, even the babies, are producing a lot of waste every year, so much so that we just don't have any places to put it. And even when we do put it in landfill, there's nothing to say it won't come back into the environment, like we've seen with flooding in recent years. And so all this waste is getting created because we're stuck in this system that we call a linear economy, where we take, we make, and we waste. So let's, for instance, use the example of a plastic takeaway container. So number 1, we burn fossil fuels, creating emissions to make it. And then we essentially use it for, on average, about 8 minutes and then we throw it away. We're often out, maybe when we're having takeaway, so it just goes into landfill, or we can't wash it. So it's, you know, a lot of that is just kind of some of it goes in the environment, most goes into landfill, a small percentage actually gets recycled. And when you kind of think about, oh, everyone in your business, you know, eating out 5 times a week and kind of post or pre-COVID situations, just think about how much waste there is. There's this really scary stat that if you were to pack each coffee cup on top of each other, then our consumption globally on a yearly basis is enough to go to the moon 80 times and back. So that, you know, phenomenal waste that we're creating. So ultimately, the bottom line is that any product designed to be used for a matter of minutes and then thrown away is not a sustainable option, regardless of whether the product is made from plastic, paper, metal, or plants. The real culprit isn't just single-use plastics, it's single use itself. And so this is where we need companies to help us transition, but also a bit of behavioral change to move away from super convenient lifestyles that we've got so used to in the modern age. And this is all about the transition to a better model, which is called a circular economy. So about 45% of the world's emissions comes from how we make our food and produce our goods. So that's a significant amount. So 45% can be tackled through the switch to the circular economy. So not only are we reducing our waste profile, we'd also be reducing our emissions profile. And this is where you kind of have this really great system going, where we're getting our natural resources and using them well. We're producing, we're using, we're reusing and reusing and recirculating. We're repairing everything, just like they did in the good old days of grandparents' generations or parents' generations. And then the small percentage that we can't keep in circulation, we're recycling, and ideally putting that so those recycled products become the raw material that we're going to use to start that system again. So how does this work for your business? It could be kind of starting to think about, well, what does going circular mean for you as a business, and how can you participate in that? You know, how do you enable circular thinking for your customers? It could be that sometimes you rent out a product that you have, for instance. It might be working with your supply chain in order to kind of ensure that when you're buying something, you're thinking about what happens at the end of its life. In April, we are launching the Circular Economy Directory, which is there to enable business-to-business buying. So we'll be identifying the businesses in New Zealand who operate within the circular fashion and are helping other businesses to go circular. So that's going to be a really good tool for you to use to kind of help you improve your own circularity.
Excellent, thanks, Tori. Number 3 is buy sustainably, which carries on very nicely from the idea of thinking circular, if you carry that into your buying patterns. So any organization is only as sustainable as its suppliers. Procurement research suggests that 50 to 70% of sustainability issues cannot be solved within an organization, but need to be solved with a supply chain perspective. So often it's about thinking bigger than just what you're immediately doing and thinking about that whole supply chain. And, you know, for small businesses as well, you just start thinking about it and making little changes, and slowly you can kind of get through your supply chain and try and make that as green as you can. And I'll give you some tips on how to do that. So number 1 is identifying those business needs. So first, when you're thinking about buying something new for your business, this could be something big, it could be something small. Do you need it? And then if the answer to that becomes yes, is there a more sustainable solution of how you could be getting it? So an example of this could be lots of businesses talk about the need for more cars in their fleet. So if that's a business need that you have, could you think about what really is that car going to be used for? Is it going to be for short travel around the city? Maybe then an EV is a better option. Or could you instead look at getting a subscription to a car sharing app or company, so that you can use that instead? Or is it more promoting that staff can take bikes or walk and take longer to get to those meetings? So it's just about kind of expanding how you think about the problem and not jumping to that first solution, and having a bit more time against it to think. 2, define sorting strategies. What are your business values? So often when you start to try and do some sustainable procurement, it can feel pretty overwhelming. But if you define what those values are for your business, it makes it a lot easier, because you can come up with your own sort of scheme of how you think about things before you buy. So maybe you want to reduce your waste. Then it's very easy to think, okay, well, let's look at options that have less packaging. And then that's a way that you can really quickly have that value against your business. If you have it staff-wide and everybody knows about it, there's one way that you can really quickly make those decisions. And number 3, assess suppliers and tenders. Who do you want to buy it from? So that's all about supporting the people who are doing those really great things. Our circular economy directory will be a really excellent resource to use for that. There's also some other amazing companies in New Zealand. Amotai has lists of Māori and Pacifica businesses that you can support. So looking a little bit further afield, sometimes there's some real gems that might not be in sort of the usual places you would look to find people to buy off, or suppliers. And so if you can sort of assess who you want to be working with, and then try and build that relationship so that it's not just you buying off them, discuss with them around what they can be doing, what you're doing, sharing resources with them. We have some businesses within our network who say share that climate action tool because it's free with all their supply chain, so that they are kind of sharing that knowledge and trying to improve together.
Oh, and so number 4, look, we do talk about sustainability often being a bit of a journey. You know, it's pretty hard to make all these challenges overnight, and you will find that when you start making some actions, then you start kind of thinking that way, and it's a bit of a snowball effect as well. And you know, we've seen that there is this rise in the eco-consumer. We've seen that more and more suppliers are kind of along that supply chain are asking for credentials around this. So it's an important thing to start communicating, but it's also important to make sure you know what you're communicating and that you're doing it honestly. So there's a kind of strong data that shows brands with strong brand purpose grow at a faster rate. This is from kind of a Colmer Brunton Better Futures report, but also when we look at this with specific organisations such as Unilever, they show that they're kind of purpose-driven brands, so those ones who are taking action for better societal and environmental futures, are performing at a much faster rate, so at almost 70% faster than their other brands. So great opportunity there, as we said. But there's a significant lack of trust in how consumers will sometimes read that data. So a Consumer NZ survey that about 50% of the consumers don't trust the environmental kind of claims that companies are making, and over 70% actually don't know how to identify what product is more sustainable. So it's important as businesses that we help them and that we're honest with our communication. I want to go there. So it's important to kind of not use sustainability jargon, and that you're kind of connecting with people with everyday language. Also to ideally avoid the S word too much, which is the sustainability one, because it does mean different things to different people, and the brands really leading in this space tend to use it quite sparingly, and they kind of show through their actions versus their talk as well. And avoid stock sustainability language and statements. For example, we're committed to protecting the planet for future generations. Together we can continue our sustainability journey, facing the biggest challenge of our time to build a better world, good for the environment, our communities, and for business. So a person reading that might just go, yeah, so what? You're talking the talk, how are you walking the walk? So it's important that you're really specific. And this is where specific accreditations can help, such as Fair Trade, Living Wage. Some that, you know, there's a bit of a robust process in order to earn those titles, rather than just creating your own. And this is why 50% of people don't believe a lot of the claims, is because of, you know, those businesses who see the opportunity with those eco customers, but are kind of marketing rather than actually doing the work. Kind of what we saw with some of the big petrol companies, you know, they spent more money marketing about green initiatives than actually investing in green initiatives. So really important that you don't get pulled down that way.
And following from that, the best way to avoid greenwashing is to build your own knowledge, so you know what you're able to talk about and you have a bit of an understanding around what those kind of key sustainability terms mean. So great that you're here today to start that, you know, journey, or maybe you're already on it and hopefully this was still really useful and interesting. But what we want you to do is continue this journey and continue learning. So we will send out in the follow-up email to this some links to what we've talked about and all those great resources like the Climate Action Toolbox, which I showed you. We also have lots of other free resources on the SBN website, and they cover a huge range of topics. So if there is something particular you're currently working on in your business, check them out and see, there might be something really useful there. And make sure you read up on sustainability initiatives within your industry. So there's always specific stuff going on in different industries. It could be that there's like a very specific recycling scheme for something that's commonly used in your industry. It could be that you can get together with other people and discuss what you guys are working on, because you'll all be facing really similar challenges. So it's a great way to kind of meet other people in the industry and work together. You can also join the Sustainable Business Network, and we do lots of other upskilling opportunities. One of those is Get Sustainable Online, which is kind of aimed at small to medium businesses at the start of their journey and helping them along, kind of giving you a 1-year plan to get everything sorted and some ways that you can get your business on the right track. And along with that, we also have a workshop series called Starting Out on Sustainability, and it covers lots of topics that we talked about today, but in a more in-depth way, but similar, that we're trying to do really practical tips that you can take away from that workshop and implement in your business. And we cover things like the circular economy, procurement, communications, climate action. So check those out. And then we also have longer courses on sustainable leadership and procurement, which if you are interested, we can tell you all about after this. So, Tori.
And this was a quote that particularly stuck with me from David Edinburgh at the recent Glasgow Summit on climate change. And I think, you know, there's a lot about the doom and gloom of climate change, but I think ultimately it's us trying to really work towards a better world for our mokopuna. And this, I think, is a good message for us to kind of keep in our heads as, you know, we strive to start taking action to achieve that. If working apart we're a force powerful enough to destabilize our planet, surely working together we're powerful enough to save it. In my lifetime, I've witnessed a terrible decline. In yours, you could and should witness a wonderful recovery. And it really is an all hands on deck. You know, this requires individuals, business, really rallying against government to kind of put the policies that enable us to take these changes. Awesome. Cool. So I think we've got a couple of questions. The first one is pretty quickly to answer from Briar around our leadership course. And it's probably and whether we'll be doing one in Wellington this year or whether we offer the virtual. And this is something that we are doing in what, next week, Ayla?
Yeah, that's right.
And so it's kind of set over 3 months with 2 days each month. The first 2 sessions are going to be virtual. So the first kind of 2 months of sessions, with the third at this stage looking to be Auckland. But of course that will depend on what the situation is. So a lot of the feedback we get is around that kind of person to person, but also we're aware that we want to have as low carbon and as widely accessible course as possible. So at this stage it's a bit of a bit of a combo. Cool. Right. And really interesting question from Tim as well. Cass Dewar, who's part of the network, so good to see she's coming up there, recently appeared on the project to discuss her concerns regarding greenwashing. took her key message to be that consumers can avoid wash products by looking for independent verification of claims, like a mark or a certification on packaging. Do you agree with that view? And yes, as a consumer, if yes, as a consumer, what marks or certification bodies should be looking for trust? Yes, we would agree. I think there's, and this is where it's important to know actually what is a certification and what is maybe a clever marketing logo that an organisation has used. So ones like Fair Trade, you know, the global organisations that go through a robust process and check-in process, living wage, and in New Zealand, Toitu, so it used to be Environment, but Toitu, carbon reduced, carbon zero, you know, climate positive or carbon zero. Again, that organisation, you know, these are companies who are going through robust processes. I think until you kind of start to build your knowledge, you should always take them with a bit of a grain of salt until you kind of know how good a certification is, because there are a few less kind of robust ones. And another question from Karina. Question regarding the sustainability workshops. At the moment, we're going for the Toitu certificate. Is it better to just go with Toitu first and then do the sustainability series next year, or do these align? Do you want to kind of talk to that one, Ayla?
Yeah, sure thing. First, amazing, great job on Toitu. That's super exciting. And I know that can be quite an intensive process. So good luck, and yeah, great to see you guys doing that. It's really depends. There's lots, the series does have two focused on carbon. So maybe the first one there, if you're doing that, won't be as applicable because it's more that sort of basic, not going through your reduction and things. It's more what you can do through the toolbox. But the second one is more focused on what different sort of what do you call them, that you can buy once you've done the Toitu certificate. Tori, what are they called? That's blank to me. Like the different ways you can buy trees, or you can buy more energy efficient ovens in different country, that sort of thing. So it looks at the different kind of types of carbon sinks, offsets, thank you. It's the different types of offsets. So that could be really interesting to come along to see where you guys want to do any offsetting that you are doing, and kind of the different schools of thought around that, because that's having a bit of a moment as well, that there's lots of discussion around that, and if, you know, big pine plantations are the right thing for New Zealand. And yes, that could be really interesting. And also I think the great thing about the series is because it covers, we've tried to kind of do all the different topics we think are really crucial for a business to think about. You can also send different staff to different ones depending on what area they work in. So you can send, you know, someone to procurement, someone to communications. So there, I think it would still be really useful, and you can choose, kind of pick and choose which ones you think would be great for your business.
Yeah, they're very much focused on action. And the wider, I think there's sometimes with sustainability, people might focus quite a lot on climate and on those carbon emissions, but there's actually a much wider set that sustainability falls into. So kind of actually starting to think about challenging your model would be something around like the product stewardship one. So yeah, some really cool things in there. From Tim, is animal welfare in the scope of sustainability, things like cage-free hens? Yeah, absolutely. So that's both from an environmental and also a kind of a social lens. So, you know, when people are taking sustainable action, it's often to buy organic, to buy free range, things that generally are better farming practices. So with agriculture, you know, organic is avoiding a lot of the fertilizers that damage the soil for future generations. So we've got, you know, and soil itself has an amazing ability to absorb carbon. So if we don't treat that soil well, the ability to kind of remove emissions from the atmosphere is reduced as well. So really thinking about how these organizations like farming, like agriculture are operating. And there's a big movement in New Zealand to try and move from more traditional farming practices to more regenerative farming practices and how we diversify our land use.
And I think that as well, you know, we talk about sustainability being that three-legged stool, and I do think that's a really good way to understand it. But it also isn't that separate. Often things that are good for social, you know, everything that's good for social ends up being good for environmental. It is more connected than we sometimes, you know, I think humans like to put things in different boxes, but it is all really connected. And that's a good thing to think about as well, Tim, when I was talking about the sustainable buying or procurement. That's one of the values that as a business you guys might think we're really passionate about animal welfare, and so then that influences what you buy, and then you can, you know, start thinking about, well, does that mean that it's organic, does that mean it's vegan, you know, that sort of thing. So it's a good one if that is one of your values. It can inform how you buy, and then you kind of slowly build up all those different values that your business cares about and slowly learn more about each of them.
Yeah, awesome. And I think that was the last of kind of the questions, unless there's anything else. And Tim, I'm actually just going to post in the pot a link to our website, which has detail on the certifications. But to help you do, we've already done a lot of that research for you. So a good link to check when you're trying to understand what ones are more meaningful than others. Okay, so I think we'll close off now with a karakia. Ayla, do you want to do the honours?
Sure thing. Thank you everyone for coming. It was lovely to have you on the call. So, unuhia, 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 ki te uru tapu nui, kia wātea, kia mama, te nākau. Te tinana, te wairoa, ki te ara tangata. Goia rā e rongo, whakairehia ake ki ronga. Kia tina, tina, huie, tai kie.
Ka kite.
Ka kite everybody.